Jennie Joseph presents The Hands That Caught Us, a legacy podcast series with our midwife elders, an archival offering through the Perinatal Pause Podcast with Jennie Joseph, where we rest, reclaim, and remember one story at a time. Welcome to The Hands That Caught Us, a sacred series within the Perinatal Pause Podcast with Jennie Joseph. In each episode, we sit in reverence with our elder midwives, keepers of ancestral knowledge, community healers, and witnesses to the sacred continuum of life. These conversations are a pause, a restoration, and a reclaiming of our birthright. These are the stories that built us, and these are the stories that sustain us.
The wonderful Lavonne Moore. I am so happy you joined me today. Thank you for saying yes. Thank you for being willing to share. I am excited to hear what you have to say.
Well, I feel honored to be invited to be on her podcast. So I was like, oh, yes, it's Jennie. Yes. Jennie
Thank
Joseph,
you.
I want to be there.
Well, I was thinking just before we got on, I think you might win the prize for being the first Black nurse practitioner or nurse midwife doing women's health that I ever met. I don't know how long ago. It was many, many years ago, but you had already started Chosen Vessels. And I'm just intrigued by that because now, you see more women and women of color nurse midwives and nurses, in the independent space and doing, private practice and so on. But you were the first one I ever came across. So Lavonne, tell me, obviously you're a midwife, but tell me, how did that show up in your life? Where did that come from? What was the first inkling, the first piece? You mentioned it was a spiritual calling. Share more.
My first introduction into midwifery really was around doula work. I was doing some birth work for family, my nieces, and assisted my sister with the birth. That I was quite overwhelmed with. It's really hard to see those you love in pain. So that's why I always talk to patients about, only my mom's going to be there. Well, it's really a different thing when it's the people you love in pain. But so that's how I kind of introduced. That's how I met Akmiri. That's how we all started doing birth work in this area, Minnesota. I started doing family, and then was trained through Gail. Can't even think of Gail's who does.
Gail Tully.
Gail Tully. Gail Tully really kind of introduced me to birth work and trained us here. They were using the model out of Chicago, Connect One, because that's what it's called, right?
Health Connect One.
Health Connect One. And so we were trained through Gail, through Health Connect One here in Minnesota. And that's kind of how I came into that work, helping others, and really wasn't real well informed about midwifery at first. I knew about women's health, and that's what I had aspired to be. We have our plans and God laughs. Because I aspired to be a women's healthcare nurse practitioner, and that was my goal. And but he had other things planned for me.
When you mention family, I think that there's that link there. So many of us have, a calling in our line. Do you have midwives, in the ancestral line? Do you know?
The interesting thing about that is one day, and I just realized this recently within the last year, I had she was not a grandmother by blood, but a grandmother by love, from Mississippi. We called her Mama Orr. And Mama Orr, I used to spend a lot of time, she was a storyteller. She was a griot. And she would tell me all these stories. And I realized one day, about a year ago, they were all about birth.
There you go.
Every single story she told me was about childbirth.
Now,
baby born with a veil and what that means, and all these stories around midwifery. And it's so funny to end up in this space after I spent all these hours as a child listening to these stories about birth.
I just think, there are numbers of people who will, once they realize the connection, they'll even name the ancestor, but at the time it didn't click.
Right.
Looking back now, we see there's something about how this work just moves on through generationally, right? And it's
Yes.
just so intriguing to me. When you think about it, suddenly you realize, yeah, there is somebody there. So you were called in, you called, just like you said, through the doula connection, through the training connection, and the spirit moved you, and you answered that call. So what made you get going? How did you get yourself from nurse into midwifery? Which route did you take?
Well, I went through the C&M route,
Okay.
through the
So nurse
University of
midwife.
Minnesota, right? And again, that was one of those again spiritual experience when uh one of our elders in our church who I we had adopted, our family had adopted her because she was a senior alone. So we
Mm,
adopted her as our grandmother, and we tended to her, and she always was with us, and every holiday and whatever we had Mother Gill with us. And Mother Gill was a nurse, and she had worked at Drew in in
ah,
Los Angeles and had met a nurse there. Um, had worked with her years ago, and she was coming to visit, and she had invited me to dinner. Now, who the nurse is Gail. If I'm saying her name correctly, she's the head of the midwifery program at Charles Drew in LA at one time.
okay.
And she came here to for a site visit to see what was happening at the by with the head of the program in Minnesota. And she brought her to dinner. And that was a dinner I was not gonna go to. Um, I was like, I'm tired. I'm not gonna go. I know I was invited. I don't want to go to Mother Gill's tonight. I'm tired. I laid down, took off my clothes, really tried not to go, and could not rest and could not lay down. I was just spiritually, I had to go to this. So I went. And in that conversation, that's how I got recruited into midwifery. She looked at me and were having a conversation. Melissa Avery, who was the head of the program at the U, she said, you're a midwife. You talk like a midwife. You are a
Isn't
midwife, and you need to
that
be
amazing?
and that's how I became a midwife. I went, talked to her, she recruited me, and I said, why? She said, I want you to come and at least talk to me. And I said, okay, well, I will. And you never make a decision, right, without all the information. So I didn't really know a lot about midwifery. So I went to talk with her and then learned it was really an extension of women's health, right? It was the
Yes.
highest extension. It was
Yeah.
in terms of birth. And I was like, well, I think I can do this. And so I decided to do that. And I did. I decided
What
that
year
was
of,
the calling because I tell you, Jenny, it was a powerful pull
yes.
spiritually because I was not going. I took my clothes off. I laid down. I had no
Yes.
peace, no rest until I got up and got dressed and went.
And literally, she said to you, to your face, you're a midwife.
Yep.
Isn't
She
that
said,
something?
she
So
said, you're a midwife.
what year are we talking about here? When was this?
I don't even remember. My mind has things that are stressful or things that are whatever. My mind has a really great way of
Hmm.
protecting me. And so
Hmm.
I forget a lot of things if they're
Hmm.
too hard, too traumatic, too whatever. My
Sure.
my brain is really good at taking that away. So I don't really remember. But
What year did you graduate from your
I
university?
believe I finished in 2000. I literally have to look at my CV. I believe I finished in 2000 in um 11 or 1 um 2011, I believe. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah,
Okay.
I
So
think. Yeah. I think
I look, you got your notes right there. That's what counts,
I gotta
right?
look. I gotta literally
That's
look.
okay. Like you say, I mean, I think about, as we go through this series of talking with the elders, the vast number of years, I actually should do some math and figure out between us all, how many cumulative years do we have in this work, right? And
Yeah.
so many of us, it's not just from getting the certification and the piece of paper. It's literally been our entire lives, our adult lives. And the stories are very similar. So when you got out the gate where was your first experience as a certified nurse midwife? Was it in the hospital? Were you at the home? Where were you as you moved into this new career path?
I went into clinic, actually. I went into outpatient setting.
Mm,
Is when I first started. And my story is no more unique than to anyone else than in the fact that I came out of the U of M, I guess, in 2003. So I have to go back to that. Found the
okay.
date, 2003.
Hmm.
Um, so wow, it's been 21 years.
Look at that, right?
Oh, I didn't even realize that myself. Yeah, it's been 21 years since I graduated, but I went into outpatient. When
Mm,
I finished, I went into outpatient clinic at a federally qualified healthcare center. So I went into primarily Black patient clinic. It's multicultural, but we had a large percentage of clients who are African American descent. And I did women's health in that clinical setting.
hmm.
And my stories, like many, there's many, as you know, when you talk with elders, you got that group that I just love hanging out with because I love to hear their stories of Shafia and Makeda and those who had a really awesome experience in outpatient, doing not even outpatient, I mean in home birth,
Yes,
where they were able to support one another. It was a unique time in history that no one will ever have again, right? And
right.
so I really love to hear those stories. And I think how awesome that must have been because so many of us came out in a whole nother time frame where it feels like it was such a political battle
Mhm.
against midwifery and the OBGYN, and where so many Black midwives were not able to get full scope positions. Um,
Right. That's very important because, we have got, in a historical context, the waxes and wanes, obviously through enslavement,
mhm,
Black midwives, African midwives delivered everybody, right? Delivered,
right,
the commodity that was human chattel. And then Jim Crow, it was the grand midwives, the so-called granny midwives, particularly in the South, who were supporting families, Black and white families. And then mid 20th century and the growth of the physicians, the hospitals, Medicaid reimbursing, people were moved out of the homes and into hospital institutions for delivery services. And the midwifery, the home birth-based midwives were eradicated on
right.
purpose. And so
Mhm,
there was that time when suddenly midwifery was gone, except for in very rural areas and very low-income areas where they had to make use of
mhm.
the Black midwives and the indigenous midwives and the immigrant midwives.
Yes,
And then
yes.
we got some resurgence, excuse me, in the so-called hippie movement when it became very trendy and very granola
Yes.
to have midwifery.
Mhm,
And then we went back into, oh, no, here come the nurse midwives. And the nurse midwives, I think maybe from the 80s on, maybe from the 70s, but certainly, I know nurse midwifery, there were a small contingent in, through the recent decades, but it has grown now to nurse midwives being in place, mostly in hospital institutions, and again having more power. And like you said, you came out in 2003. That time frame was one of those glitchy time frames, I think, where
mhm,
there was a lot of drama. I think that's when the C-section rate was getting out of control, when the induction rate
mhm,
was, these things sort of, they all have a correlation.
mhm,
They
mhm,
all tend to go together. And I think, you know, those of you that went into clinic space where you were so needed, it was such an important role to fill.
mhm, mhm, mhm.
Because up until that point, there wasn't a diversification of outpatient clinic-based staff, right?
Exactly, exactly. Still few Black midwives. I mean, when I graduated from the U, I think I was the fourth midwife of color. Um, so
Wow.
there
Yeah.
was from that program, period.
Yes.
And
Yes.
that's one of the oldest programs in the country,
Hmm.
certainly in this region.
Yes.
And so it was a big deal to come out and be a midwife of color. It still is a big deal to be a midwife,
Yes.
period, in this country because our numbers have decreased so. And I think sometimes even with us, even though we're CNMs, one of the things that we're still midwives, and I think people um, get all caught up in the part of that resurgence was that focus that white midwives had. They had you all excited about the birth, only about catching.
Yes.
But midwifery is so much bigger than that. And one of the things that I've learned um, is about our history and our
Yes.
culture within midwifery. And then it really changed my perspective because at first I thought, oh, I'm not catching. Does that mean I'm not a midwife? Of course, it doesn't mean I'm not a midwife. Um, because midwifery in our tradition and the Black tradition is so much bigger than that. We cared
Yes.
for our families, we cared for the community. Um, and it was just more than just the birth. That was a small piece of the work that we did. When you
Yes.
think of Maud Clark and some of them, I may be messing. Was that her last name?
Maud
Maud
Cullen.
Cullen. Thank you, Cullen.
Yes.
I'm messing up names today, Jenny. I even
You're
said Jones
okay.
for you. Sorry about that,
Oh,
but Maud Cullen, I've read these books and I've read these histories because one of the things that in my training, I didn't get the Black history of midwifery.
yeah. Yeah.
So I explored that on my own. I didn't get home birth training.
Yes.
So I started training and working on my own because I thought, well, maybe I'll do home birth practice. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, and do some home births. And then I decided not as a nurse midwife, too expensive, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because one of the things about being a nurse midwife is then you have a whole nother level when it comes to malpractice.
Yes.
So it's too expensive. And then also, I just thought people were doing too much cowgirl stuff that I didn't think was necessarily always the safest to be doing in home birth setting for some of these
Yeah.
women. I think that home birth is a wonderful option. There's many women who that's a great space for them, but I also think that if it wasn't for CNMs, then a lot of women wouldn't be able to have midwives because
Absolutely.
they'd risk out. They'd risk out and even in the hospital environment, they'd risk out of that care. So I'm just really glad that to be able to fill that little gap and be able to provide that level of care and also for the direction of the piece of that really came to be for me in my practice, which
Was
is breastfeeding.
yes, right. That was another one. You were an international board certified lactation consultant, right?
Yes,
I think pretty
right.
early on as well, maybe one of the very few.
Few, yes.
Uh-huh. See, so I think what you're weaving together for us here, and it's so important, and I'm so grateful for you sharing this because there's got to be context as
Mm-hmm.
we look back and try to learn to be able to look forward, right? If we think
Mm-hmm.
about
Yep.
the Sankofa approach, right? Like we can see historically now how things have gone and why they went the way they went. You
Mm-hmm.
have said something that's very close to my heart as well. And you know, I'm very similar. I am very committed to outpatient. I work in my what I call the perinatal space because I
Mm-hmm.
believe midwifery fits there, in this country at least, perfectly.
Mm-hmm.
You can get more volume in that space. You can reach more people. You can scale programs, models, clinics where you can't do so much with a small niche of folk who are comfortable or seeking home
Mm-hmm.
birth. There are plenty of us. I know that sounds weird, but I believe that there are plenty of us providing home birth services to the percentage of folk who are actually seeking home birth services.
Right.
One of the things that I've found over these years, I've been in the United States since 1989, so I'm into 36 years of being here. And so I've been here longer than I have been in Europe, right?
Wow.
Born and raised in England, but I've been here longer than I lived there.
Okay.
One of the things that has always hit me coming from England, coming in as a midwife, already trained as a midwife, as a hospital-based midwife in the United Kingdom, when I got here, I realized the biggest gap is the community space.
Mm.
Because so much, like you said, is focused on that birth room and everybody's all caught up on the birth. And, one of the first things I had to work on once I got licensed in America in Florida, 1995, I got my license, one of the first things I had to work on was getting over myself. You know,
Mm-hmm.
this sort of egomania that we have as midwives, we got to be at the perineum, we got to be the one, we got to look what I did, oh my gosh, and she had a 12-pound baby over an intact perineum. I'm so awesome, right? All of that
Uh-huh.
stuff. Once I figured out I have a handful of people asking for that. I'm happy to sort of support them and serve them. But
Mm-hmm.
where's everybody else?
Mm-hmm.
And everybody else was in the health departments, in the federally qualified health centers, at
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Joe Blow, frantic and in
Mm-hmm.
panic stations because they weren't getting what they needed. And being
Right.
able to bring the midwifery model to them, I felt was like revolutionary.
Right, right. And I really feel the same way. I do in terms of, because my goal is to use the midwife model of care to support everyone who encourage everyone to breastfeed and support all those that do.
Yeah.
I think within that cultural model is so many pieces that are really central to our culture. And so I just think it's just really key. And so one of the things that came prevailed for me within midwifery was the fact that we needed to reclaim that cultural practice of breastfeeding.
Yes.
Here we have
Yes.
a tool that's free, that our own bodies make, that doesn't require a program, doesn't require, a snap card or nothing else to feed our children, that can nourish their bodies, that can heal their bodies, um, that can protect their bodies. So many aspects, all these social, what we call social determinants of health. Breastfeeding connects to every single one.
Yes, it does. You were so
Economics, greenery, being green, so many aspects, everything from social violence to whatever, it addresses that. And so I really thought this is really an underutilized tool in our community that we need to be reclaiming this cultural practice and encouraging women to breastfeed and supporting everyone that does, because the benefits to baby, to the breastfeeding mom, how it pays forward to one's health, you just can't beat it. There's nothing on the market that gives you the numbers that breastfeeding does. How it can decrease cancer, cardiovascular risk, include hypertension and diabetes by over 20%. That's amazing.
It is. It's so, and I feel so moved just listening to you share your passion. I mean, this is how I've known you from the day one. You have never
Hmm.
changed. You have always been this person, this
Hmm.
advocate, this um such a stand for our community.
Yeah, well, thank you. It's just really important. And it really dawned on me as I was at a lecture one time when I'm thinking, and of course, we were seeing a lot of, babies impacted by drug use. There's a lot of crack cocaine use and other drug use. And to think that breastfeeding can heal a damaged neurological system that's been damaged by drugs, come on now. And
Yeah,
you're not using that.
that's right.
You're not using that. It can move and reroute around damaged pathways. I,
Yeah.
I couldn't believe it. When I heard, I was like, ah, here's a tool, right? Here is a tool that we can be using to heal our communities, to create secured attachment and bonding, to
Mhm.
parent differently,
Yeah.
all these things that we're struggling with from our trauma. And there's trauma that comes with it, right? And I talk about that. When
Yeah.
as you know, I did my doctorate research on breastfeeding. So I always tell people Chocolate Milk Club didn't just come from nowhere, it came from sound research. And I interviewed Black women about breastfeeding and
Mm.
what they wanted to see around breastfeeding, and then created a program. And Black women did want to breastfeed, but there was always this assumption, and they would say, people assume that we don't. They'll just come in the room. Are you breastfeeding? No. Okay. And just walk out. People weren't taking the time to educate them about breastfeeding. They weren't seeing the images of women breastfeeding as commonly in the community, right? Not in places that they spend time, church, the store, wherever. So, it's just really important for the benefits of our community to reclaim this practice and to educate people about the benefits of it and the harmfulness of formula. Look what happened with that formula crisis,
Yes.
right? Do you think that's the last crisis? Absolutely not.
Yes. I think so much of this, I mean, I call my organization Common Sense Childbirth,
Mm-hmm.
because you think about what has happened historically, what has happened for millennia, right? There's certain pieces of physiology, parts of physiology that you don't have to know anything about. You don't have to go to class for. You don't have to have credentials to do. The continuum of human existence has
Mm-hmm.
been the same and continues to be the same and will most likely always be the same. And some things that you can really stand on and know that
Mm-hmm.
if there's a baby in your belly, it will grow. It will come out. You can feed and nourish that child, rinse and repeat. Like it's like
Yeah.
it boggles the mind,
Right.
the
Right.
simplicity and the complexity all at once.
Yes.
Don't have
Yes.
to do anything.
Right, right. And that's why they talk about catching, right? Because we're not delivering the baby. The mom's delivering that baby's gonna come out whether there's hands there or not. If there was
Right.
just the bottom of the bed, eventually
Right.
that baby would get to the bottom of that bed and the bed would catch it. So you're exactly right. But we make all this stuff so complicated. Because even like when you talk about lactation, this board certified lactation consultant, I was certified and one of the only board certified lactation consultants in the state of Minnesota of color. Okay. Until just what, uh, 2 years ago? Okay.
Goodness.
Well, 2 years ago, I think we had a nurse midwife who moved here who was board certified. And then there was another doula who got certified as a lactation consultant. Um, and I always tell people, again, these are titles that I really believe are put up as barriers by the
Barriers.
majority culture, right?
Yes.
Because people say, "Oh, you're a lactation consultant." That's not a big deal to me. Because
Hmm.
you know what? I'm a midwife and breastfeeding is midwifery. That's just something I could get because I'm a midwife. I
Yes.
knew about it because it's a part of what midwives do. So I don't look at it in the same way that other people do because I'm a
Yes.
midwife. Breastfeeding is midwifery.
Indeed.
So these are just titles people create to create division, to create all these problems that are unreal. And even with IBCLC, their new certification guidelines for maintenance are ridiculous,
Hmm.
um, and are more than what I am required to practice independently in the state and as a independent prescriber that includes narcotics in the state of Minnesota. So it's ridiculous.
Well, I think once again, the politics show up and, the propaganda comes with it,
Mm-hmm.
the misinformation, the obfuscation, the barriers, as you call it. These things seem to continue to thwart everyone's best liberation, truthfully.
Mm-hmm.
Our pathways are really treacherous
Mm-hmm.
sometimes to just get to live, to
Yeah.
just get to be, to
Mm-hmm.
just get to have our full human rights
Mm-hmm.
in place. And this is why work, especially in the United States around midwifery, ends up being justice work.
Yeah.
I
Which
got
is
on the plane, like
yeah.
I said, and I had no idea. I thought, oh, let me go get a job at the hospital. And the amount of laughter and derision was, it was very debilitating. I was depressed for years when I first got here because
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't understand how what's normal around the rest of the entire world, midwifery, normal physiological birth, was absent here.
Yeah.
When I arrived in 89, the big public health drama was infant mortality. You remember how we were so obsessed
Mm-hmm.
with it was the infants, the baby not making it to the first year of life, and
Mm-hmm.
looking frantically for reasons and causes, when, as usual, all of the reasons and causes, the root causes, were from the same place.
Yes.
Racism, classism,
Yeah.
discrimination. Like
Yeah.
that's it. That's really when you bottom line out infant mortality.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Then we
Yep.
switch to, oh yes, actually we forgot, but there's a mother, there's a woman, there's a birthing person that brings that baby. So let's look at them and see how they're doing. Oh, oops, they're not doing so well. Oh, well, let's spend a whole bunch more money trying to figure that out then. Let's do more research. Let's do this. Let's do that. Let's have another conference. But at the end of the day, what was the root cause? Oh, yeah, racism, classism, gender
Right.
discrimination,
Mm-hmm.
othering,
That's right.
plain wickedness at the end of the day.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because when you think about that public health, because even before centering became a thing,
You're
you
talking
had
about centering pregnancy?
centering pregnancy. When you talk
Yeah,
about
group
looking
prenatal
at
care.
group prenatal care, when you talk about having group prenatal care, and really, you had been talking about that model way before then. Talking about wrapping around those services, simplifying services. Everyone who needs to see the woman needs to see her while she's there. You have been talking, but you know what cracks me up about this when I think about it? Really, what it is, America is so good for throwing out the baby with the bathwater. So there's a lot
Literally.
of public health practices that they used to have, they need to bring back. Because really all that is good old fashioned OB clinic, right? Where everything happens while they're there, right? They see the provider, they see nutrition, they see everybody because everybody's ready for prenatal clinic when for that time. And
Yes,
so home visits, right? We used to have home visit care and check in on people in their home. And that's where you get a good visual of what's really going on in the home. What's in those cabinets, in those refrigerators, and having a conversation with
yes,
folks, asking them, now you need to go outside and smoke. You can't be smoking in the house. You need to get in the habit of doing that now. See how smoky this is, all those educational moments that you have when you really engage with people
that's right.
and not try to be so far removed from them that
Yes,
you're not impactful. So all those old care models that we used to do that need to return
yes,
um, is a part of what we need to look at. That's why
right,
that saying, okay, what do we keep and what needs to go? Things that are useful should be kept. I don't care what year it is, how much AI we have. We're
right,
still human people and we
right.
need human connectedness.
That's right.
And we need to figure out a way to not throw away things that really work well, and then connect them with things that do. So I just think about, your work around prenatal care. When you talk about being at perinatal space, when you were above, you were above, beyond the curve, right? Before centering came in, became popular, you were talking about not just the prenatal visit per se with just the mom being engaged in her care, but everyone, the system,
The system wrapping
the
around.
yes, the system, and it still needs to happen because it's still not even happening. Centering works, blah blah blah. Fine, we've done centering, even though we've tweaked it a bit to be more culturally appropriate when we were working with our women.
Hmm.
But it's a systems issue, and that still hasn't been resolved. And I think it's not in just our clinical site; it's a nation issue in the U.S.
Well, I think, you're raising some very good points here, and I wonder, let's talk a little bit about the similar issues that the system presents, the barriers, the harms to the birthing mama, the birthing family, the community. Let's talk about the impact on the providers, especially those on the ground floor, on the in the grassroots of perinatal care and
Hmm.
support, whether they're working in institutions or not. How do you feel? I mean, what helped you survive all these systems of exclusion and, surveillance and just extra, like, the onset, the moral injury, the trauma even of
Yeah.
being in practice inside of this very unwieldy and very unsafe system for the families. But what about for the providers?
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up because we don't talk about that enough. We don't talk about what it feels like to be in these systems as a provider of color and usually one of the few, right?
Hmm?
Because I was, of course, the only Black midwife in the system in the clinic in which I worked. And even I remember in the early days, one of the things you talked about, what kept you going? Because there was a lot of insults, a lot of racism, um, a lot of that, othering, being in meetings, people are interpreting what you said, even though it's like, excuse me, I'm not speaking another language here. I stated this, this, and this is why, but there's always someone trying to manage Black women. And that's something I am still challenged with personally and professionally. How people are always trying to right police Black bodies, and they're always trying to manage Black women. And one of the things that I really, and it really bothered me for a long time until I recently, um, and I can't remember what it was. It was a lecture or something that I'd heard online, but it was a historical documentary piece. Oh, you know what it was? It was the Black History piece that they had offered um, a while ago, and it was a three season series about Black history that had been put out. Do you remember that one? And they put it was on Prime. In any event, a lot of Angela Davis and all of these wonderful Black historians and intellectuals were sharing different pieces about Black history. And one of the things that I realized where that policing came from really helped me, because that used to just really bother me to no end. But now understanding that white people feel like they should and can police us because they were given permission by the government to police us. I'm just talking about everyday white folks.
Yeah.
We're given permission to keep an eye on us, to monitor us, to police us. And that was given by our government, which was shocking at one point in time. And so that's where that comes from in their DNA now, where they feel they can always police us. I think it's unfortunate we're in these systems where people are disrespectful. I remember working even in clinic and saying good morning to white physicians, and they would just walk by, you wouldn't even speak. Fortunately, I'm at North Point. I've had much better experiences than some of the other sites that I have been at, but there's always still those challenges because regardless of where you're working, there are still issues with any Black woman who has any sense of confidence, um, any intellect, feels confident. They concede, they consider that to be prideful or all these negatives when it's just really being well trained. I was really well trained when I came. I worked under Black providers that trained me well. I can remember when I first came, one of the providers said to me, I just can't believe you got a school. You just know too much or know so much or something to that extent. I came out really well trained. I trained under Black nurse practitioner. I trained under another Black internal medicine physician who just knew their stuff and just really helped me to be really knowledgeable when I came out as a nurse practitioner in women's health. And then I went back and to midwifery, and I had to work extra hard because a lot of the people went into midwifery were former labor and delivery nurses.
Yes.
And I was encouraged, that's okay, because they have to unlearn behavior while you're learning the stuff. They still have to unlearn. But in any event, I worked at it. It was a little harder for me because I had not worked L&D. That was my initial nursing job, desired to work in L&D position, could never get in. People didn't leave those jobs. I ended up in a whole nother area that I just did not like, which was neurology. And worked intensive care in the floor, and it was not my gifting. And I wanted to go into L&D. So it took a long time for me to get finally into my space, even though I always knew that was the space that I wanted to be in. From the beginning, I always knew I like working in anywhere I went. I always tried to be the provider that served the women. Even when I worked in corrections, I'll do the women's unit. Nobody wanted to do it. So finally, when I was able to get into that space, I had to work hard, right? They'd have breaks. When they were on break, I would go and work in the L&D unit to learn skills that I didn't have. But I also worked and met through that training another nurse midwife who had not been an labor and delivery nurse, and she had not had any children.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's also a uniqueness, right?
Yes.
That people feel you can't be in the space unless you've had children. But people forget God equips who he calls. And he often calls those who confound the
Yes.
wise. And so that's what happened to me because I'm not a woman who had children. And I did not work L&D, but I worked and I worked hard and I studied and I got through. But a lot of, people try to knock your confidence though
Yes.
along the way. And when because of our ability not to get employment, not just me, Janet Mohammed, there's other Black midwives that we know through the Black Midwives Organization, they weren't able to get full scope positions ever because of the racism in these institutions. So I'm glad I didn't get a full scope because it led me to a much larger world.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so I'm really glad that God had something else planned for me and that I ended up doing outpatient, doing OBGYN in clinic, and doing centering and on bringing all these kinds of practices into our clinic setting that wouldn't have necessarily been there hadn't I brought those in, spoke about them. I created so I brought in centering to our clinic, um, helped to change how we do that OB care, talked about, you know, lactation and made our clinic one of the first breastfeeding friendly clinics in the state. So
Yes.
I wouldn't have been able to do a lot of that because you know what? You've been on night shift, working, catching, and that's all you've
Right.
been doing.
Exhausted.
And
Mm-hmm.
that's all you would have been doing. My life has been so much bigger because of not doing just that one piece.
Yes.
I still had, even with clinic, I would do labor support for some women. And so I would still go to some births. And then after a while, I even stopped that because I like sleeping at night and being at home and having my life.
Yes.
And I don't have, you know, you get to a point where you don't got nothing to prove, right? Because at first people, you still, yeah, whatever. I have nothing to prove. Um, and my work is what it is and it speaks for itself.
That's such a word, as you will say, right? Tell me, what would you wish for these young midwives or those that just caught this calling and are like, I'm gonna go this pathway. What do you wish they would understand now as they begin a journey into midwifery about the deeper purpose of the work, about the toll of the work, about the joy of the work? What would you like to impart to these young folk coming up behind us?
I want them to know that this is spiritual work. And if you haven't done your work, you may need to do that work before you go fooling with other folks.
Yes.
Because, you have to have come in with clean, clear energy and intention, and be a woman of valor, a woman of character who
Yes.
is really concerned about those you serve because there's not enough money for the work that's involved in this work. So you have to be really, really committed to it. Because I really believe midwifery is a lifestyle. You know that, Jenny. What
Yes.
what what cost has it cost you? People need to understand the cost that's involved and be really careful and clear about not sacrificing their marriages, not
That's right.
sacrificing their own children, because that's
Hmm.
not real midwifery.
Yeah, that's one of the hardest ones, isn't it? I think. And it's disingenuous, but we get caught up in the oxytocin, as I say,
Yes.
you just get bathed in this glory and this sense of fulfillment and sense of self. I lived so vicariously for so many years of my midwifery career. I've been a midwife for 45 years at this point. I love every minute. I started at 19 and I would not do anything else but it
Hmm.
take you off on some paths sometimes. And, the detriment has been to my family.
Mm-hmm.
Good question. I have one child who would still to this day say, that I took care of everybody else's family first.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And you don't do that intentionally, but it happens. And next thing
Right.
you know, it's too late.
Yeah. 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 And that's real. And so people need to come into this work and understand the sacrifice. It's like those who serve Christ, and that's their faith, is that it's really a lifestyle. And
Mhm.
so you have to be willing to commit to the lifestyle and know what comes with that. And also being open to where you're being guided, because what you have intended may not be what ends up turning out. That
Yes.
training may be intended for something else. I mean, my story certainly reflects that. And
Yes.
that can be a hard time at first adjusting to that, right?
Yes.
It's like, wait a minute, I did all this. I thought I'd be doing this. Nope, this is about this. And when you settle into that and understand and being open to what that means, like I said, oh my goodness, my life has been so much bigger. I've traveled all over the world, not just the country, the world. That wouldn't have happened.
Yes.
Um, Being involved in some practice with several midwives, you're in there fighting with those European midwives about, all these little politic things that happen, practices of midwife practices. They're fighting against doctors. I just had no idea the politics that were involved. My ignorance is bliss, right? Because when I didn't know a lot about midwifery when I came in, now these younger women may know a lot more of the politics involved. I didn't know that. Ignorance is bliss, because had I known differently, I may have chose something different, because I
Yeah.
really felt, as having been through that as a nurse, I'd already been down that, seen that. It was not pleasant. And I don't know if I would have done that again. So that's why I guess the universe creator said, oh, you don't need to know about that. Ignorance is bliss, because you may not do what you're told. Because it's really something. It's really something. Um, the politics. And they're not getting any better.
No, not getting
They're
any easier at all. At
Yeah,
all.
they're not. And I think the younger women have a little energy for individual practice and really moving more towards individual practices and setting those up. I'd encourage them to continue to do that, because I think working within systems and keeping that true model can be difficult, right?
Yeah.
But I like groups of women getting together versus individuals. So
That's
that's
right.
what's nice about choices, right? They're a group of midwives, right? And nurse
Mhm.
practitioners working together. So I think Black women working as groups, specifically Black women, to create practices in the future will be important, because I don't think the politics are going to get any better. They can, and I just think people have to really know that this is what they're called to do. Know that there'll be challenges, and anything that you are called to do doesn't mean it's going to be easy. And being called to it and knowing that you're clear on your purpose helps you to get through the struggle. But don't sacrifice your children or your marriage for it. That's one of the things that I just would tell young women, don't do that. And have some really realistic expectations and conversations with your partner and your children about what this looks like for you guys' life.
Yeah. Wise words, and just so timely. We need to hear the wisdom of the elders. We need to hear from those who have done this, have the experience, have the lived experience. And just like we reach out and try to help our moms, our families, our community members, we have to remember sometimes you just have to center yourself in
Mm-hmm.
order to prevail.
Right,
So
right.
thank you, thank you, thank you, Lavonne.
Thank
Elder
you.
Midwife Lavonne Moore, for pausing with us and sharing your sacred story today. And may your hands in your heart and your history continue to guide us. And this has been a moment of remembering and resting and reclaiming, being in fellowship with each other, being in community with each other. I appreciate you being on the Perinatal Pause podcast, and especially in our series, The Hands That Caught Us. So, Lavonne, thank you. I love you. I'm so
Well,
grateful for you.
love you and thank you, Jennie, for all that you do. You have been a trailblazer and one of my sheroes. You and Shafia and McKay, you guys are my sheroes. So, and you're also my tribe. And so, when you asked one thing about what has gotten me through, it has been you guys. So, one of the things that has carried, that's why at conferences, all those gatherings, I try to be there because it strengthens me. It gives me the wisdom and the encouragement to continue on. So, thank you for all that you do. And I hope to see you in person soon.
Yes, absolutely.